You're listening to a podcast from the BBC World Service. This is Hardtalk with me, Sarah Montague. Thanks for downloading this edition of the programme and I hope you enjoy it. All 28 leaders of the European Union were holed up in buildings around me here in Brussels for hours into the night at the end of last week, trying to strike a deal that would keep the UK in the European Union. The British people will have their say on what they came up with in a referendum in June. If they vote to leave the European Union, what will it mean not only for the UK, but also for the EU itself? My guest on Hard Talk today is the President of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz. Could Britain's vote tear the whole Union apart? Martin Schulz, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you very much.
Did David Cameron get a good deal from the other leaders of the European Union?
I think yes, it was a difficult negotiation, but well prepared. My parliament contributed a lot to improve the papers on the table, and at the end I think yes, it is a deal who helped to, I hope, to convince British voters to stay in the European Union.
It's a far cry from the fundamental far-reaching change that he initially promised when he went into the negotiation, isn't it?
I think there is a change. Look to the four sections of this negotiation paper and the deal. On the basis of that paper, you will find a lot of things he asked for, especially the agreement on better lawmaking between the European Union, the Commission and the Member States showed that a lot of requests of David Cameron, less burden for small and medium enterprises, more effectiveness, less bureaucracy, more transparency, is already in that agreement. So yes, I think the deal is based on some major improvements.
OK, well, let's consider what difference it will make, because those things that you're talking about there were things that anyway the European Union, that Brussels had promised that it would do, become more competitive. But what about this promise that the UK will be excluded from ever closer union? Do you think that will actually change anything for the UK?
I think the list of opt-outs of the United Kingdom from European policies is impressive. An opt-out from the euro, an opt-out from Schengen, an opt-out from police cooperation and justice cooperation in some areas. So if there is a proof that ever-binding, ever-closer union was not binding in the past, then the United Kingdom is a proof. So what we describe now is a reality.
Well, that's what I'm curious about in a way, is what's different? Those things you're talking about already existed. So
no,
what's different?
It existed, but now the 28 member states agreed amongst that this is not binding for those who don't want it. And this is clarity. It makes a clarification for British voters in the referendum that this is now crystal clear. This is not binding for the United Kingdom.
And the treaties will be changed to reflect that?
The future treaty changes to come. Yes, this is an agreement then to include this when the treaty change will happen in the next years. But one thing we should add is also other countries said clearly, especially the Eurozone countries, yes, in a future treaty change that should be implemented, but other treaty changes as well.
Okay, so, but to be clear, because this is, a lot of people have said different things about this, not least the French foreign minister, who says there will be no revision of treaties, no veto for the UK over reinforcement of the Eurozone, and no calling into questions the principle of free circulation. That's different, certainly, from what has been told to the UK, which is that this will be legally binding and irreversible because it will be in the treaties of the EU. That's right.
The deal with the United Kingdom was absolutely clear. Never closer union is legally not binding for the United Kingdom. That was agreed between 28 member states, and in a future treaty change that will be written exactly, literally, like it is in the treaty. So nobody can tell to British voters other things than was written clearly on the paper.
Okay. On migrants and benefits, which is another big issue and caused a lot of difficulties in the negotiations, there was, as a result of this deal, there will be changes to in-work benefits. There's a 4-year taper that can be in place for 7 years, and then there'll be paying of child benefit at the cost of living from the migrant's own country. Do you think the effect of those changes to benefits will put EU migrants off going to the UK?
Don't believe so. The whole exercise was to protect the United Kingdom for the time being to be abused with the welfare system of the United Kingdom, and this is understandable, and in a temporary, limited time, I think it is admissible also to accept some differences between UK citizens and non-citizens. If this is temporarily limited, this is acceptable because other countries did the same. After the Eastern European countries joined the European Union, some of the member states, my own included, had a 7 years period for free access to the labour market. By the way, it was the United Kingdom which didn't participate in this.
Indeed, and that's the justification for allowing it. But my question is different. My question is, will it put EU migrants off? And you say, no, you don't think so.
For the time being, the United Kingdom described the situation, and the situation was the justification to get this opt-out.
Sure.
But and the answer to your question is logically, if this is then applied, I think that will lead to less migration to the United Kingdom. But for the time being, it is obviously the case that the United Kingdom argues we have too much, and therefore we want that opt-out. And I understood your question as a question for the future. Will that in future times? And it's difficult for me to predict it, but I presume that the opt-out is asked to prevent too much in the United Kingdom.
Indeed it is, but there are some people who say, fine, you can introduce these changes, but they won't make any difference. They won't put people off coming. So why did you have 28 leaders negotiating into the night over this?
Look, if this is some people may say, okay, but the reality is the United Kingdom feels over too much burdens for the time being. I think for the own labour market, and they asked that temporary limited exception because they want to bring order in that situation, and the goal is to reduce the number of people looking for a job in the United Kingdom with these additional credits, and therefore the whole exercise led to exactly that conclusion. So maybe that people say, yeah, that will not lead to the effects Cameron wished, but my opinion is it will lead to it, which makes for a lot of people, by the way, it created a lot of difficult debates in the European Council, because especially the Eastern European countries felt that this is a problem for their citizens, and therefore I have to repeat, it will create the effect, but for everybody must be clear, temporarily limited.
7 years, no more.
7 years.
Okay, and of course the other thing is that other people, not least Germany, since the deal has been struck, have looked at it and said, hold on a second, we should look if we can apply this, the indexation of child benefit, for example.
Exclusively indexation of child benefit. All the other items Germany didn't claim to do the same.
No, but a spokeswoman for Germany's Federal Ministry of Family Affairs, it's a viable option that child benefits will be adjusted, and they're going to discuss it.
It was one of the conclusions, that this from a certain moment is open for all member states to do the same, and the German Chancellor said this is a thing we should consider as well. Yes, that's true, but only this one.
Only that aspect, because this is one of the fears that was raised, this idea of contagion. Is it entirely acceptable if other countries now say, look, let's index child benefit?
I have a certain understanding for it, because the question is, where are the children living? If somebody is working on one place and his family living on another place, the question is not if he has not the right to get child benefit, but the child benefit should link to the place where the children live. And this is no dramatic thing. I find this a very pragmatic approach at the end, and therefore that other countries say, okay, we do the same, is understandable.
And that will happen. So there will be some element of contagion. Other countries will say,
look, we discussed about the requests of the United Kingdom, and this was a very specific United Kingdom negotiation, not a German one. If the Germans, after the agreement, say, yeah, and one element of the agreement could apply also for us, okay, but that doesn't change the reality that we negotiated about the specific status of the United Kingdom.
You will know that David Cameron came back, and there were plenty of people, not least Jacob Rees-Mogg, a Tory MP, who said for so much Labour he has achieved so little. And it was this argument that actually, there, you had everybody talking about child benefit or the tapering on in-work benefits. These are tiny little details that are not the fundamental reform that a lot of Britain wants.
This is because, I can't comment here about every observation of any backbencher of the Tories.
OK, well, I want to ask you about another Conservative MP, the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, because he argues, well, you may say that this is significant with all these factors, but he thinks there is a better, bigger negotiation that can be had, and he's arguing, campaigning, to leave the EU because he says there's only one way to get the change we need, and that is to vote to go. Because all EU history shows they only really listen to a population when it says no. I'd like to be in a reformed EU, that's my hope, an EU that's based on fundamental treaty change.
I have nothing to comment about Boris Johnson and what he is doing, but one thing is for me clear, more clearer since Boris Johnson has expressed his view. For the first time since a long time, a Conservative Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is fighting for Europe and for the European Union. This is a progress in itself. So Boris Johnson contributed to a real change in Europe. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is fighting for the European Union.
But Boris Johnson is suggesting something else, that there could be a second referendum. There could be a second renegotiation. And
yeah, he should read the conclusions, and my feeling is he is also contributing to clarification. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is running for the campaign to stay in, and that makes him, because it is not about a Tory debate. It is about winning the confidence of British voters, of all British voters as a whole, and this is an advantage for David Cameron.
Okay, so if there is the referendum in June, and actually the British people vote to leave, and perhaps David Cameron resigns, or David Cameron comes back, or maybe Boris Johnson is negotiating again and saying, hold on a second, we might be prepared to stay in a fully reformed EU.
Okay, we have now an agreement, and now we are running all to convince British citizens to vote for that agreement.
I'm asking you, could there be a second deal?
28 heads of states and government, after a very difficult and detailed negotiations, on the basis of a very tough negotiated result, are now asking altogether British voters to vote for the agreement on the table. Or do you believe that we ask altogether British voters to vote yes, because we say, yeah, but if you vote not yes, then we restart the whole exercise? I think this is quite clear that we ask, because it is a good deal, British voters to vote yes.
But you don't rule out a renegotiation, an alternative, more fundamental one, after a no vote, that could lead to another referendum.
The only thing I rule out is the following one, that I participate in any debate about not to defend the deal we agreed and to ask British voters to vote for that deal. I could never imagine in my life, but it is the case, to support a Conservative Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to fight for the European Union. It's a wonderful thing.
You're enjoying it?
Yeah, absolutely. It changed Europe already. Look, the fact that the Conservative Prime Minister, a Tory Prime Minister, is now running in the Commons across the country, defending the European Union, saying, let's stay in, it's better for us and it's better for the Union. This is a real progress.
But he might not win.
He will win.
How do you know?
Because I'm confident, and I'm not only confident, I'm convinced.
And those who say, vote to leave, and then let's have a free trade arrangement with the EU, perhaps along the line that Canada has.
I think he raised the number of free trade agreements to negotiate yesterday in the Commons. I think 57 he has to renegotiate with all the member states of the European Union, with Canada, with the United States. Look, let's be honest and not joke. This is a better way to stay in.
But renegotiating with people who want access to British markets. So there would be, not least the companies within Europe would say, look, do a deal, we need British buyers.
I'm very grateful for your question, because it shows that for those who argue, let's leave, and then we restart the whole negotiation, there are leading the United Kingdom, one of the biggest and most important economies of the world, in a limbo of years and years of negotiation with other trade partners in the world in an uncertain frame. Better to stay in.
Le Figaro, the newspaper, the day after the deal was struck, said if Britain remains in the EU on the conditions it's been offered, it kills it. If it leaves, it kills it too. And the argument was that the process of this, setting out special conditions for somebody who wasn't happy to sign up to the membership, causes problems because anybody, any member of state could say, hold on a second, I want that. Do you think there is something in that it has damaged the European Union?
The agreement on Friday and Saturday was crystal clear. It is a United Kingdom agreement. It was only the United Kingdom asking, and the government in London, for a referendum. In no other country it was discussed. And I heard from the 27 heads of states and government around the table that this is a UK deal. Nobody made a similar appeal.
But all those leaders go back home to their countries where there are significant Eurosceptic opposition parties, perhaps, who are saying, hold on a second, we want some of that.
No, but I repeat, I hope my answer was clear enough. There is no room for similar procedures. That was agreed also.
There was another issue to be discussed, that of migration and the refugee crisis. Was there frustration that there was discussion about?
Especially in Germany, I think, frustration that we have not yet found the necessary solidarity with other countries. But also here we moved, in my eyes, in a good direction. I hope that on the 7th of March we will meet again with the Turkish government, and then if we apply to the so-called measure package with Turkey, and if we control the borders more effective, the external borders of the European Union, if the retransfer of those who have obviously no right to stay as political asylum seekers will be more effective. If the relocation scheme we agreed on will really put in force, then we have a good chance to manage that crisis.
But look at the way that the EU is reacting to what's happening in Greece, which is this threat that you've got to get your act together in...
Who is acting here, the EU or the member states of the European Union? Let's be precise. The EU institution, my parliament, the Commission, even some of the authorities of the Council are acting coherent and in a clear and precise defined way of relocation, of receiving the citizens in the hotspots, relocation afterwards, identification, cooperation between the necessary institutions like Europol, like the refugee authorities. Who is objecting against this?
And the threat,
national government.
And the threat to reimpose, to move Schengen area so that there's a new border with Greece.
Who is arguing for it? The European Union or some member states on a very unilateral, egoistic approach?
But it is, whether it's the member states or not, Greece has been threatened that if they don't get their act together, the border will be reimposed within 3 months.
Yeah, and we transform Greece in a big refugee camp.
And that would be a mistake.
Absolutely. What will the people do? I give you an example. You close the border between Macedonia and Greece. What will the people do? Do you believe that the families fleeing from Daesh or from the Assad bombs will return to Syria? They look for another way, and another way will be the Mediterranean or the Adriatic Sea. You will not prevent, with closing a border, somebody who is fleeing from Daesh to flee. Therefore, to close borders is no solution. The solution is a fair redistribution of the refugees amongst the 28 member states of the European Union.
And yet there is no movement towards that for all the people saying this is what should be done. You look at what's happening. Countries all over the EU are effectively ditching Schengen and closing their borders.
Exactly. And why? National interest instead of common union spirit. This is Europe which Nigel Farage wants to see. It's Europe leading into a disaster.
Okay, but on the migration question, how do you change that? Because there's no evidence that countries are going to accept the redistribution.
I give not up the fight to convince that we need a pragmatic solution on the basis of our humanitarian responsibility. We are the richest part of the world and very egoistic in some member states of the European Union. Germany said refugees could and should come to Germany. And I expect from other rich countries that they are as solidar as, for example, a country like Jordan or Lebanon are with refugees from Syria and Iraq.
You will know there are plenty of people in Europe who say that Germany made a mistake in doing that it acted like a magnet.
I can see that the country which is, as a very rich and open-minded country, sticking to his humanitarian responsibilities, makes a mistake. If it is a mistake to be solidar with people fleeing from Daesh, then I repeat that mistake. Those are making a mistake who say, this is a German problem. We have nothing to do with it. I draw a fence around my country and then globalization will pass away.
So Macedonia, Austria, Sweden?
Sweden took most of refugees and Austria also to a time where other countries already were drawing their fence.
Okay.
We should not blame those who are in a trouble today because the others take nobody, no single refugee.
Okay, but those are the countries
that is absolutely unfair.
But those are the countries, because they've taken so many, that are now closing their borders or putting a cap on it. So you say, are you saying don't blame them because they've already taken the refugees?
I find this unfair that those who take hundreds of thousands of refugees and were left alone by those who took nobody are now criticized. I would continue to criticize those who take nobody. When we when we distribute Hungary, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Poland, I could give you a long list of countries who say the Prime Minister of Hungary, here in the European Parliament, standing beside me, said, ladies and gentlemen, this is a German problem. It's not a Hungarian problem. We have nothing to do with the management of refugees. We don't take refugees. This is a member state of the European Union. And you blame now countries...
So what do you do? What do you think should happen to...
You blame now countries like Sweden, who took in the same time hundreds and thousands of
So what do you
refugees.
think should happen to the likes of Hungary and Viktor Orban?
We should stick to the relocation scheme we agreed.
And if they don't accept it, what do you say? We don't want you as a member of the club?
We should stick to the relocation of the... I can't exclude a country from the European Union.
But you'd like to, from the look of your reaction.
I can't exclude a country from the European Union, therefore it's useless to discuss about your question. And therefore I prefer to answer to the previous question, how to solve the problem, not by excluding a country from the European Union, but by encouraging those countries who want to participate in the relocation scheme to do so and to start to relocate the people.
The refugee crisis, Britain leaving. Can you remember a time, can you think of a time when the EU was under threat as it is now? Is there a danger it could tear itself apart?
Never in my political life, never in my time as a member of the European Parliament, I saw the Union in such a dramatic shape. Therefore, the agreement with the United Kingdom was a step forward. And if British voters vote yes to stay in the European Union, this is a signal of encouragement for all of us.
Martin Schulz, thank you for coming on Hard Talk.
Thank you.
This edition of Hard Talk was presented by me, Sarah Montague. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.